Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Yuliia and it's my pleasure to welcome you at Ukraine Media Center. Today is day 953 of the full-scale invasion of a homeland by Russian aggressor. It's been 11 years of the war, and today we have invited you to hear about the results and to see the presentation of the research aimed at studying the role of the state in social reintegration of veterans, both male and female. So today we will see the results of the research that was held in June, September of this year, that was aimed at studying of the way the state influences the social reintegration of our defenders. So let me introduce our speakers. Joining us online is Natalia Kalmykova, the Minister for Veterans Affairs of Ukraine. Also joining us in the studio is Yuliia Kirillova, Acting Executive Director of the Ukrainian Veterans Foundation, and Anastasiia Selianinova, Head of the Educational and Analytical Department of the Ukrainian Veterans Foundation. So, Ms. Natalia, let's give the floor to you. I hope you're seeing and hearing us. So can you please outline the direction of our today's discussion? It's no secret to anybody that the social reintegration of our veterans is guided mostly by your ministry, thanks to your efforts. So please, the floor is yours. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's an honor for me to open this presentation because the study about the veterans is the foundation on which we build our decisions. It's important both for the Ministry for Veterans Affairs and other stakeholders who one way or another work in the veterans' interest. It's no secret to anybody that our army has grown during the full-scale aggression, which means that the number of the people who take part in the combat operations has grown, and those people are becoming veterans after they get back to civil life. Any resolution, any opinion on how those people should act should start with the question, what exactly do you need? Because doing the opposite means not to meet the requirements, not to do something that people need from you. In our case, those are not just regular people, those are the people who sacrificed a lot to defend, to protect every single one of us, every single one of those who continues growing children and building plans for the future in their civil lives. That's why I'm humbled by the fact that the Ukrainian Veterans Foundation continues doing research in the area of veterans community. And if we take a look at all those studies made by the foundation from the beginning of its establishment, it will allow us to track the dynamics of the opinion of the public sentiment and the veterans themselves, and thus correct or adjust our solutions. I would like to thank the team of the Ukrainian Veterans Foundation, Analytical Center of Ukrainian Veterans Foundation, for this study, and I hope as much people as possible can get familiarized with it and make their resolutions to better support our veterans in civil life. I wish all of you an interesting presentation and right resolutions. Thank you, Ms. Natalia. Thank you, Mr. Yuliia. So let's discuss the study in detail. Let's talk about the goal that was set, what exactly you were aiming to study, and to what extent is it safe to state that the results of the study will help you in your further work? Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank our team of analysts, pretty young team that has already proved themselves as professionals. I do appreciate it. And as we were starting to work on this study, our work started with analyzing our previous studies in which we were trying to research who the veterans are, what are their basic needs, what are the challenges they're facing, and we were able to track such a red line that was going through all of our studies: the lack of understanding of the state's role in their reintegration. So as we were asking what exactly they were dissatisfied with, they were saying is the state, and we were trying to understand what the state is in their understanding, and thus we could segregate the functions of all those agencies taking part in the process of reintegration of veterans, and to find out at which stage, at which level those agencies may do or fail to do something, on where those policies that they implement are insufficient or inefficient. This is why we decided to conduct this study, to see how do veterans evaluate the work of those agencies, what is important for them. And when it comes to basic challenges they're facing, the most frequently they mention bureaucratic obstacles. This is what popped up in our previous studies, and in this study it's mentioned too that for the veterans it's extremely difficult to go through all those bureaucratic things that pop up here and there right after the veterans retire. So as soon as they retire, they switch their roles from military, they switch to a different status, to a veteran status. And to acquire this status, those people need to fulfill a number of different activities, like go to the social protection center, go to the territorial staffing center to get registered there, and to gather a lot of certificates, a lot of paperwork, which is a huge obstacle for a lot of veterans. The first obstacle is the lack of awareness about which documents to submit, where to submit, whom to address, which agencies exist even to do that, and it results in serious mental complications, I would say, because people get nervous, they start getting agitated, and it results in even more difficulties in exercising those activities for them. It can even be tracked on our hotline, on our crisis support hotline. People call us for advice where to go with this or that matter, and our psychologists, they mentioned that in order to forward, to link that person with that agency or institution where they can get relevant service, or where they should submit the documents to obtain some certain certificate, they feel some agitation inside themselves. And in order for a person to digest that information, to understand where to go step by step, they need to be calmed down. So the psychologists start working with them on that level immediately. And then that process starts looking easier for that person. But it's not everybody who calls to our crisis support hotline. Not everybody gets this kind of help. That's why we have such a huge percentage of discontents. And talking about the key obstacles, the main one, I mean, bureaucracy is a whole different thing, but yet another thing is employment. Last year, we've conducted one of our studies. We were working with WorkUA and LobbyX, and we were conducting surveys and in-depth interviews with our employers. And as we were asking our employers whether they were ready to employ veterans, 97% stated yes, definitely, we're surely ready to employ veterans. But at the same time, we had a parallel survey among the veterans, and 30% of the veterans back then, when 97% of the employers declared that they are ready to employ the veterans, 30% of the veterans among those surveyed were looking for jobs. And hence the question, what's wrong about this situation? Where's the missing link? Where's the invisible wall that prevents them from entering into any cooperation and researching that matter on a more profound level? We surveyed the employers whether they had adaptation programs for the veterans at their workplaces, and about 17% of those surveyed responded yes, that they have some onboarding programs for the veterans who retire and get back to civil life and eventually get employed. However, recently I was attending an activity gathering a lot of employers, big companies, who were discussing the problems and the challenges they're facing. And different companies were demonstrating their presentations, how they started, what happened then. And the figures were different for all of the companies. Some of them have veterans who were mobilized, and some of them have veterans who are retiring from military service and get back to their workplace. So among those who retired and get back to their place of employment, 30 to 40% were only remaining there at their jobs, which means that we need to develop quality programs of workplace adaptation for the veterans, and also to adapt the environment where the veterans are going back to adapt the collectives, to adapt the workplaces, not only to train HRs to work with the veterans, but to train all of the work collective how to interact with the veterans in this environment of new challenges and new realities we're living in, new reality we're facing. So for us, it was extremely important to study every single field, every single area the veterans are coming back to, because at this moment the state is the biggest employer in the country, and the veterans are mostly going back to state enterprises, state-controlled companies, different government agencies. And after our victory, after the big demobilization, the veterans, both male and female, are going to become an intense potential of Ukraine in its post-war reconstruction, because now Ukraine is facing the staff hunger. We're lacking highly qualified personnel who would work in the companies, in the industry, and veterans, both male and female, may become that huge mover. We have to create those conditions in which they will want to stay, not only at our company, at our job, but in our country in general. This is exactly why we were trying to study different areas. That's why we study the extension of social services to our veterans, in order to respond to those challenges in the most efficient manner possible, because Ukraine is acting under conditions of limited resources. We have no right to err. We have no right to take erroneous decisions. That's why all of our work of Ukrainian Veterans Foundation is based on those studies of profound needs of veterans both male and female. You may remember that during one of our survey we were asking the veterans what they were going to do after their demobilization, and about 64% responded that they want to develop their own businesses, and Ukrainian Veterans Foundation basically provides financial support, grant support for the development of their own businesses for our veterans, and for the time being we've extended such support in the total amount of 430 million for more than 800 veterans initiatives. And thanks to our support, the recipients of our financial support were able to establish 731 new workplaces without account of seasonal workers. And you know, it's one of those brilliant examples of how the state takes care about their defenders after their retirement, and how our defenders who retired, who switched to veteran status, how they reinforce the economy of our country, because conditionally saying, if we look at the numbers of unemployed as of the 1st January 2024, that 731 jobs that they've created is 0.76% of the total number of unemployed, but it's 731 families who got jobs, who got employed, who don't worry about their tomorrow. They know that their kids will have something to eat, to wear, they can go to school. And looking from the state perspective, it's a small number, but from the perspective of the regions, that's a huge number, and that's a good example of how veterans provide the momentum to the Ukrainian economy. They don't only defend the country with the arms in their hands, but after their retirement, they help and support the development and reconstruction of our country. Thank you very much, Yuliia. So let's proceed to the study itself. Let's start with the methodology and then talk about the essence. Right, so why this topic is important? Social integration is a key process for the life of every individual and function of the society in general. It influences mental health, it influences the ability of people to build connections with the others, and this is what life of every single one of us is made of. Veterans, both male and female, as former military, they had to adapt to new crisis conditions, and that's why as they get back to civil life, they have an urge to reintegrate. And this reintegration is a two-sided road. It happens both thanks to the efforts of the veterans and thanks to the efforts and conditions created by the society. And here we can talk about different actors in this process of reintegration. But why is the state special? Because they are interested in the well-being of all of their citizens. It's interested in the integrity of the society, in its unity. It's interested in citizens' activity, and they have relevant resources, they have relevant authorizations to create the context favorable for integration. But we understand if they underperforms in its efforts, it may result in serious social and economic problems. Talking about the methodology, we had two parts of the study. One was an office study of effective state programs, services extended to the veterans. Is more of a regulatory part, the way the state sees their role in the process of reintegration. And the second part was an empiric study, the analysis of focus groups. We've studied 6 focus groups with veterans of different categories, and we were conducting secondary analysis of other focus groups that we were creating for another study. So let's proceed to the first part. It's quite brief. I think that we better focus on the vision of the role of the state by the veterans. So here is this table that we should thank our colleague Volodymyr for. So how do we approach this task? We were focusing on the role of the central executive bodies. They are the guarantors and those who formulate the veterans policy, and they also take part in its implementation. So we've divided this period in 6 different stages. Different government agencies were involved on different stages of this process of reintegration. But what have we stumbled upon? The problem is that we cannot define the time frame, nor in other surveys, neither in regulations. There are no time benchmarks that would describe the duration of all of those stages. But the sequence is more or less like this. So we start with the retirement from military service. Then there is the health rehabilitation, then prosthetics stage, then professional education and adaptation, opportunities to get a new profession, opportunity to find a new job if necessary, then employment, and total well-being is such a stage which can basically have no end because it's an ongoing support of the veterans and working with the results of the previous stages, and basically it's a very brief scheme of interaction between different government agencies on the way of reintegration of the veterans. But if we consider in detail the employment stage, it's important because it contemplates an opportunity to change the mental health condition of the veterans, to improve it, and serious role here is played by the Ministry of Economy of Ukraine. When it comes to employment, this function is being exercised by State Employment Service. Different agencies may have other specific programs, dedicated programs for the veterans, or have some vacancies open which would be relevant for the skills that the veterans acquire during their military service. And an alternative is establishment of their own business. The State Employment Service extends grants for the veterans' businesses. They have contests, the bids under which they extend funding for veterans' businesses. And what I was observing, that there are new initiatives. The problem may be only in lack of coordination, but generally the Ministry for Veterans Affairs fulfills their role. They have a central role in this process. They formulate the policies, they delegate some functions at certain stages to other central executive authority bodies. And I would like to proceed to the way the veterans understand the role of the state in their reintegration. So let's start with definition of the word state. Only one person was saying that it's a political structure, and the rest were describing it in everyday terms, and they were calling it mutual responsibility or obligations in front of one another, mechanisms that provide certain services in certain situations, family. Sometimes people were using different metaphors related to the families. They were saying, like, my family is a state for me. But at the same time, we were seeing that the veterans have certain negative experience of interaction with the representatives of the state, with bureaucratic procedures, and it reflects on their definition of the state. Some of them had quite a negative definition of the state, like the state was associated with problems, it was associated with corruption and bureaucracy. And it's important to understand, because even this minimum interaction with the state, it already influences the way the state is seen. Talking about the process of reintegration itself, we were saying that it's mental health and physical health renewal, it's reestablishment of social connections and deployment. Well, it reflected on those blocks that we've segregated for ourselves. But talking about the process when it starts and when it ends, it was interesting that some were saying that it may even start a couple of months before retirement, but what was interesting, they were emphasizing that this first point at which they switch to the civil life is interaction with state territorial conscription center, and many servicemen or veterans see this point as an entry point for reintegration. This is where the role of the state can be emphasized better through support in bureaucratic procedures and highlighting some awareness function. Many were saying that reintegration is about people veterans having less anxious thoughts, being more involved in civil life rather than in their battle experiences. They were mentioning reservedness, demureness, self-control as an evidence of reintegration. And many were saying that full reintegration is impossible in their opinion. We have to understand why they say so. There may be expectation that the veterans transform into regular civilians, but they say themselves that it's impossible. And in this case, we should emphasize that reintegration should be going on not with account of getting back to civil life, but taking into account of all those factors like mental health in a way that it would be comfortable for the veterans. Also, they mention a lot the word opportunities, that the reintegration activities should be aimed at establishing equal opportunities for them. The veterans understand that that period they spent in the front lines, the civilians were having some new opportunities. They were acquiring some skills and knowledge that the veterans couldn't get because they were defending us. And this is when the state should compensate this inequality. Then talking about the role of the society, they are other actors of reintegration, like the brothers in arms. They talk about the family as the support in all stages and motivation to renewal, but they also share negative experiences, saying that the conditions are quite difficult for relations in the family when a father or a mother or brother or sister are still in the front lines and their relationships go through crisis, and the stress may only complicate the reintegration process. A lot of veterans said that it's an important piece of support for those whose family relationships continued. And brothers in arms, they keep emphasizing its importance. They provide mental health support to each other, just supporting each other in conversations, with advice on bureaucratic procedures, on rehabilitation, in support of building of social network after their retirement, development of businesses, and help with employment. So basically in all stages they await and they provide such aid to each other. And talking about the society in general, many veterans don't have such high expectations on part of the society. They just say that the favorable conditions is the respect and understanding they can see, and they may be afraid of different complications for their reintegration because of the lack of acceptance by the society. And here the role of the society is to continue being informed and continue being understanding. And talking about the role of the state, there's a lot of critics, but at the same time, they keep saying that the role of the state is the most important, that reintegration is impossible without it. And it's expressed through the expectation of synchronization of actions, something that only state may ensure. We were talking about the family, that the family may reinforce every single family, providing some disbursements, and this is when there will be somebody to take care about the veterans as long as they keep recuperating. Also, we were saying that the brothers in arms can provide different services which are currently being provided through veterans hubs, so that the veterans can support each other, have this space for networking, and to have this psychological support for each other. And quite important is that state has to continue supporting interaction between the veterans and the civilians, and to prevent stigmatization, because the state can fulfill this awareness raising role. They can help in establishing dialogue and preventing crisis situations. And why is it important? So we've highlighted the risks of the low quality reintegration that the veterans mentioned themselves. It's the refusal to provide support on part of the state if they were experiencing some extended procedures, the expressions of disrespect on part of some single person who provides such services. Further on, such people may refuse to address the state for some support. And the attitude of the society to the veterans, if they feel no support, there will be no trust, and it may result in social conflicts. That's a very broad topic, what kind of conflicts those may be, but that's the real result. Then different dependencies, addictions, like gambling addiction, narcotics addiction, alcohol addiction. Many veterans were facing such situations either by themselves, or they were facing those risks in their brothers and sisters in arms. So it's no risk, it's the reality. Then another risk is the loss of potentially active citizens. That's a huge risk for the state itself. All of the citizens who can be economically, politically active are important for us, and if we don't reintegrate them, they cannot be involved in the development of the country. And security risk, which is also important, it's another huge topic, but very frequently is being omitted. Well, if we don't involve these people into civil life in the very beginning, it creates risks for the rest of the society. And the key challenges that we've highlighted for ourselves is indifference. The veterans frequently feel that some social workers or some employees of some specific agencies who provide services related to status assignment, they don't show sufficient attention. They experience indifference. Nobody's asking how were they doing, whether they had success in their reintegration. And then violation of veterans' rights. Some services that were supposed to be provided are not provided, and it can contemplate the process. The veterans don't know where to go. They frequently keep asking one another for support, but there is a demand to make it legal, so they could legally discuss the violation of their rights, and so that those problems can be solved. Lack of information, it was also frequently mentioned when they were saying that as people come back from the front lines, they end up in some starting points of entry to civil life, but they are completely lost. They don't know where to go. And even in case the state has some success in establishment of new programs, the veterans don't find it out. They are not being made aware of it. They keep looking by themselves. Those who have good connections, those who can properly use gadgets and social networks, they find what they need, but those who are not socially reintegrated, those who may have some impairments, for example, some difficulties with working with internet, they have even less access to information. And also it's a bias and stigmatization expressed by the society, by the representatives of the state. It also complicates the process. When there is a society you want to integrate to, you try to build connections with it, but they view you as someone different, they reject you. It's a huge problem that was highlighted by the veterans based on their own experience. So let's proceed to the conclusions. As you were able to see, that there is a difference between the declarative normative role of the state and the way the veterans see it. So rotating in this environment, we may see new innovations, reforms, but at the same time the veterans who are already reintegrating, they may not experience it. Some may have positive experiences, but frequently when you ask this question, it may result in a barrage of critics, which means that the attention is still lacking. It's not enough for the people to say, yes, I got this type of support and I'm completely satisfied with it. What's also important to mention that even regardless the critics without the state, this process is impossible. And only the state has unique capabilities that can make it efficient. And people really want to see the government, the state, as the key actor in the process of reintegration. And they see the state being involved on all of the stages, and its role should be in extending the opportunities. Thank you very much, Nastya. Your study contains a very good section, recommendations. They really match all of the problems that you've mentioned. I would like to suggest we stop at those recommendations, and the way you plan to communicate those recommendations to the government so they are implemented at least in part, because we understand that when it says about digitalization, probably it will support the removal of human factor, which is frequently involved in extension of all those services to the veterans, but they unfortunately get disappointed or get negative experiences about. We'll understand that this is something that will help us get rid of this component. Well, talking about recommendations, we were basing our recommendations on what the veterans say. They were recommending we stop at digitalization. People understand that the government may lack capabilities to train state employees that would be involved in reintegration of the veterans, so that those employees provide quality services to the veterans. But we understand that all of those employees cannot be properly trained. This is why people keep talking about digitalization, which removes the emotional component, expedites the procedures, and it's inclusive. Well, it's not universally inclusive. It's not like everybody is digitally educated, but if people have some skills, if they use wheelchairs, it's easier for them to provide a service through their smartphones rather than to install ramps over there. So, Ms. Yuliia, how are you going to compile all of those recommendations? We understand that it would help the veterans, but to what extent is the state open to hear all those recommendations? Well, first of all, I would like to emphasize that Ukrainian Veterans Foundation in its activity complies with all of the 5 recommendations. So let's start with the first. Training of the state employees of the basic link. to work with the veterans. Our crisis support hotline specialists, they conduct trainings. When there was a joint window opened at the social services center, they were coming to those social services centers providing trainings on how to work with the veterans. Then depersonalization in obtaining services. The veterans who submit for projects for funding, they are not supposed to gather all those paperwork. They can sign up online, get all of the support they need online, and start implementing their projects. So we've simplified, or we facilitated their lives to the maximum extent possible. So their empowerment of reintegration actors. We don't only fund the veterans' businesses, but we also fund veterans' civil society organizations that implement the projects to empower our veterans. So we work in this field as well. And talking about reassignment of the function of reintegration start point to the territorial conscription centers, we keep working on this. We've developed methodological recommendations in coordination with the Ministry of Defense for our veterans who come back. So all those roadmaps for those who retired, for the family members of the veterans, for the families of those who were gone missing in action, we are going to disseminate all those recommendations through the conscription centers, where people can get those brochures as they retire, get familiarized with that, and it would simplify the problems for them. And improvement of mutual understanding between the military and the civilians, destigmatization and trauma-informed approach. Recently, the Ukrainian Veterans Foundation made the first festival, the Veterans Circle, where we united civilians and veterans, and we've set the national record for the number of people in one hug, and we've demonstrated to the society that the veterans are just as same people as the others, yet yes, they can be different because of the way they were taking part in the combat operations. Meanwhile, civilians were not, but there's a lot of other things that unite us, such as culture, sports. That's exactly why we've had adaptive sports playgrounds, and everybody who were coming there, even the civilians, they could take part in masterclass, in archery masterclass, sitting volleyballs, or wheelchair basketball. And we were making our society familiarized with the veterans, and we were destroying artificial barriers that are created by Russian psyops between the veterans and the civilians. So we ruined them, and all of our analytics, all of our studies that we do, we disseminate them to the central executive bodies, other government agencies. We work with a huge number of big employers who use our analytics in formulating of their internal reintegration policies for adaptation of veterans and adaptation of the environment for return of the veterans. And of course, we were working with the civil society because it's about the society who plays an intense role in the return of our veterans, because our state is first of all the state, civil society, and businesses. We have these three pillars that support it all, and we try to enter into dialogue with every single one of them, thus providing all of the support possible, because in this area we have an incredibly intense expertise, and we are ready to share it. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Do we have any questions, reflections, comments on the floor? Yeah, I can see a hand. Microphone, please. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm having a question. do the veterans during the or were the veterans during the survey facing structural unemployment when the competencies of the veterans don't match with the requirements of the employers? Does the state see any risks in this issue, specifically as the numbers of the veterans are going to grow after the retirement? Thank you very much for your question. We didn't have direct questions about employment and unemployment because the study was not about it. And talking about the employment, in fact, the veterans with whom we were holding focus groups were the people who have already responded to our study, people who are quite active in their reintegration and desire to change things. That's why we cannot say that those who are less successful in reintegration were among them. That's why talking about employment, talking about structural problems, we didn't have any such information shared to us. It doesn't necessarily mean that such problems don't exist, but we were not just stressing it. Well, Yuliia was mentioned in the very beginning that there is a gap between what the employers declare, and isn't it one of the reasons why the offers from the employers don't match with the veterans' vision to which positions, which job responsibilities they could fulfill? Well, yeah, it's important to underline that each of us is a personality. We're all different, and we all have our own expectations, which don't always match with the expectations and the capabilities of other people. And the same applies to this field. The expectations of the employers and the capabilities of the veterans who were serving with the armed forces of Ukraine for 2, 3, 5, or maybe 10 years, they are no different, because the veterans who come back to civil lives, they can lose some competences, or they may not develop themselves in some certain specific sphere, comparing to the civilians who were living their lives, continuing to develop, train, study, improving their qualification. And here we come to understanding that it's important for us to create all those education programs, requalification programs, retraining programs, exactly to make our veterans competitive in the job market, because the veterans, in fact, they acquire a lot of other good skills such as stress resilience, capability to orient in stressful situations, in difficult situations, to make quick decisions, the leadership qualities. They know how to undertake responsibility. And me as a manager, when I talk to a person, it's important for me to see those qualities in a person. For example, a person may underperform in their professional activity, but we are ready to develop those skills, we are ready to train them, because I can see that those people may be internally ready. I would be ready to employ them, but not all of the employers see this problem like this, specifically as we talk about some businesses. The main goal of a business is quick return, and usually they just don't want to deal with it because it's long, it's complicated. Those people should be trained, and the veterans, they have difficulties sometimes with mental health, with physical health. They need additional adaptation in their workspace, and the employers don't want to deal with it. But as my experience demonstrates, they've started realizing it now that they're facing this stuff, hunger, and they are ready to talk about it now. They address us and they ask us what should they do. Recently we were talking to a big business who was asking us, can you please provide a mental health training for us, because our veterans, they keep resigning. Look, and I told them it's a huge problem. It requires a complex of actions, complex of activities, and training is just a small fraction of what you're supposed to do. So they just walked away. We didn't like reject them, but at the same time we never accepted to do it for them because it would yield no effect. We told them you're gonna waste a lot of money for this training, but you're not getting the result you want. And they came back and they told us, yeah, probably you're ready, let's figure something out. But it's a matter that requires additional research because there is no universal pill that would solve all of our problems. Every single field requires specific attention, specific studying, specific research of all of the problems, and target audience. Well, I think there's a lot of questions arising, and many businesses, they say that all those soft skills that our veterans have acquired during their military service, during the war, they should be transformed. All those pluses, all that experience should be translated into civilian language, so to say, so that the employers understand what it can yield, what those soft skills can yield for the employers. So aren't you going to do another study of how to transform those skills to become a bridge between employers and the veterans? Well, in fact, talking about translation into civilian language, well, probably it makes sense, but look, it's important for us to reinforce those soft skills with the hard skills that we provide to them. And for example, these guys may have cool soft skills. It's important not to lose them, but in order not to lose them, we have to reinforce their other part, thus making those soft skills only grow. Thank you very much for this conversation, and thank you very much for the systemic work of Ukrainian Veterans Foundation. I want to thank you for the interest to this topic, and I would definitely like to thank our security and defense forces, our veterans, both male and female, thanks to whom we can hold events like this. Thank you very much. Let's continue working together for our victory. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.